And now let's talk about lamps. The Swedish designer and entrepreneur Uno Kristiansson teamed up with his brother Östen and started the lighting company Luxus in 1950 in the small community of Vittsjö in the south of Sweden. And in the early 50s, he designed a range of lamps made from wood and glass, often oak or teak. And they soon became hugely popular and therefore often copied. Mm-hmm. And IKEA made several lamps inspired by Luxus. Among them, the wall lamps Raft and Bamur. I think
means like nothing.
Raft, I think, is a part of a boat. It's like it doesn't really matter. But they were introduced in the IKEA catalog in 1960, described as ultra-modern shape and reasonable price. Mm-hmm. And the price was indeed reasonable. It was 29 kronor, equal to $3.50. So it's very reasonable. Cheap lamps. And we have had one of these lamps, and mm-hmm. they turn up once in a while on flea markets.
I don't remember.
Markets. Okay.
In 1961, IKEA introduced an organically shaped chaiselong. Is that how you say it?
We say so in Swedish.
Chaiselong.
Yeah.
Chaiselounge. Well, it was called Singoalla in the catalog. It's obviously inspired by the chaiselong Lustgården designed by Kerstin Hörlin-Holmquist in 1958 as a part of the range Paradise, produced by Nordiska Kompaniet. Singoalla was 360 kronor. Or about $43. So that's
more expensive, yes.
Much more expensive. And it was included in the IKEA catalog for 4 years.
Yes. And
like a medium long time.
Yeah, and it's a really rare piece of furniture from IKEA, and I've seen it on on auction once or twice, but they are really expensive, and it's a good piece of furniture.
Mm. If you like that kind of furniture.
Yeah. If you
are
an old lady living in an apartment somewhere.
What is it?
Yeah, it's you're gonna sit in it with one leg up on it.
Wow.
Yeah. Moving on. Mm. Between 1962 and 1964, IKEA offered an easy chair called Rondell.
This means roundabout.
Yeah, it does. It was designed by the Danish architect Erik Wørts, or designed by. It was 135 kronor, and that's about $16. And it's a nice looking chair indeed, but without doubt an example of IKEA copying a competitor. And from a picture, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between Rondell and the chair ND83 designed by the Danish architect Nanna Ditzel already in 1952. And they were made for the cabinet maker Knud Willadsen. And there are some minor differences if one look at the details. The Danish chairs were made by a skilled cabinet maker and displays way better craftsmanship than the IKEA copy. And a telltale is the visible screws and the wooden plugs seen on the Rondell. And the reason why it could be produced was the weak Swedish copyright laws at the time, only protecting design for 10 years.
10 years?
Yeah, and the Danish chair was designed in 52 and this was in 62. But it is a copy. The only thing I'm a bit curious about is why Erik Wørts agreed to sign his name on it. It would have been easier for them to just say, this is an IKEA chair.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
In the early 60s, IKEA started producing furniture in the old Thonet factory in Poland. And a natural step, of course, was to start producing some of the old Thonet chairs. In 1962, the chair Ögla was introduced, a direct copy of the chair number 18, designed by Michael Thonet, already in 1876. Yeah. The design wasn't protected due to its age, so copyright wasn't an issue, When it was introduced in 1962, Ögla was only 29 kronor, just over $3, and soon became a huge success, and is still today available in the IKEA catalog. A few years later, IKEA also started producing the traditional Thonet rocking chair, called it Trinidad, and it was far from a success and soon disappeared from the catalog.
Yeah.
I grew up with Ögla chairs
Yeah.
around the dining table, but made of plastic.
And now let's talk about lamps again. We love lamps.
We do.
And lamps made from wood shavings got popular in the 1950s, and several different Swedish companies made their own versions. And best known are perhaps the lamps made by the company Ellysett, owned by the famous Swedish designer Hans-Agne Jakobsson. And also Yngvar Ekström, for example, constructed lamps made from wood carvings. And inspired by this, IKEA introduced lamps called Tivoli and Spån in 1964. And especially Spån was hugely similar to the lamps by Hans-Agne Jakobsson. And the lamps were far from a success and disappeared from the catalog already in the next year. But I guess some of these lamps are being sold as Hans-Agne Jakobsson because their shape are very similar to his lamps.
Mm-hmm. Next one is another chair. A lot of chairs in this, but they're popular.
And we also love chairs.
We do. The sledge-based easy chair Florens was offered by IKEA between 1965 and 66. It was available in either a high-back or a low-back version, with a price tag between 284 and 365 kronor, about 34 to 43 US dollars. So that's quite expensive.
Yeah, but this is a bit later than the first ones.
It is. Florens was marketed as a Danish chair and was inspired by a range of chairs designed by the Danish architect Børge Mogensen in 1956. Among them, model 2254, designed for Fredericia Stolefabrik. Florens wasn't long-lived at IKEA, just 2 years, 1 year, what is it? Perhaps the sledge base was a bit extreme for the common customer, maybe?
Yeah, perhaps, and it's not really this is sad to say, but it's not really a Swedish chair. It feels very much Danish, and perhaps it wasn't really something for the Swedish customers. And at the time, IKEA was very focused on the Swedish market.
Quite expensive, ändå.
Yeah, it was. It was.
I said ändå.
Yeah, it's...
Why? Moving on.
Moving on. And in 1968, IKEA introduced the sofa and easy chair Elegant. It means elegant. Designed by the architect
kind of obvious,
Lennart Bender.
Don't you think?
Yeah, perhaps. And it was designed by the architect Lennart Bender. And it was available as a low back and a wing back, with a price of 505 kronor for the wing back easy chair. And that's equal to $60. Mm-hmm. And it's of course a classic type of furniture, but with clear similarities with the easy chairs and sofas designed by the Danish architect Børge Mogensen in the early 1960s. Mm-hmm. And Elegant was a popular model and remained in the IKEA catalog until 1975. And we've seen a lot of sofas similar to the Mogensen sofas. Yeah. But we used to own one easy chair from
Mogensen.
Of Mogensen, not IKEA. No.
Between 1973 and 75, IKEA sold a swivel chair called Planet, means planet, made from molded plastic. The price tag was 388 kronor, approximately 47 US dollars. Wasn't cheap, but plastic was at the time high fashion. Yeah. It's not known who designed it, but it's for sure a somewhat simplified version of the chair Galaxy, designed for Dux by the duo Alf Svensson and Yngvar Sandström in 1971. It's interesting to also note that IKEA wasn't just inspired by the shape, but also the name. Because Galaxy is Galaxy, and Planet is Planet. So,
yeah, it's like space names.
Space theme.
Yeah. Yeah, and last, we're going to talk about Bruno Matson.
We are?
Yeah.
In the IKEA
No,
episode.
but the architect Bruno Matson influenced many Swedish furniture manufacturers during large parts of the 20th century. And his bentwood chairs developed in the 1930s was groundbreaking in Sweden. And when he started experimenting with tubular steel in the 1960s, his models were soon copied by competitors. And not least the chair Karin with the casters, introduced in 1969, influenced a long range of Swedish chairs during the 60s and 70s, but also the 80s and 90s, and still do. And IKEA started introducing chairs inspired by Matson in the early 1970s. And some examples are the tubular steel Häger with the matching table General. And soon wooden versions followed. For example, Hedby, highly inspired by Matson resting chairs. And during the 80s, IKEA continued producing furniture inspired by Matson, not least the easy chair Bore, closely resembling the Karin chair.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah. And this was some examples of furniture made by IKEA.
Inspired by someone else.
Yes.
But that's how it works.
Yes, and that's not just IKEA, but that's everyone, because you're always inspired by something else.
Of course.
The great architects in Denmark were inspired by Romans and the old Egyptians. So, I mean, that's the way it is. And if you like this episode, what should they do?
Please click thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already.
And follow us on Instagram. We're called Scandinavian Design 101. Thanks for
Thank
watching.
you for watching.